Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, August 27th, 2018. We're on the other side of, we're on the other side of my birthday. How do you like that? It was Saturday the 25th, so I didn't get on the air and tell you all that. Some of you actually knew that. Most of you probably Facebook told on me once again. Every year around, let's say August 24th, I decide, I should go on Facebook and either delete my birthday, I don't even know if you can do that, or I should change it to January 1st or something, when nobody's looking, or no one will believe that's my birthday. I'm not certain why I feel that way, but thank you to everybody who sent birthday greetings on the social media system that I really try to have nothing to do with. I don't disapprove of it, certainly, getting the birthday messages. I just feel bad because I don't know how to react to it, and it usually takes me a couple of days to realize it happened. I log into email later on, and if my birthday's on a weekend, forget about it. And then I find there are, 10,000 messages from Facebook saying you have a message on Facebook, which is kind of an irritant all by itself. I understand, I guess, they want you to go and click to go see it because then that counts as traffic for them. But really, getting a message that says you have a message in the electronic mail era is kind of annoying and stupid, but that's where we are technologically. So thanks to everybody who said happy birthday, and it was very good. It was a nice birthday. We went out for dinner, low key, because of course we had spent all our money going to Iceland. That was the big birthday gift. I don't know if I explained that. That's what was going on here. It was my wife's 50th birthday earlier in the year. My 50th birthday, Saturday. We went on neither of our birthdays, of course, but that was the season when you go. And that was the big deal. Like, let's do something huge for your 50th birthday. So we did it for ourselves. And, on the day of, it was nice. We had all kinds of errands to run for the kids, so we did all of that. We went out to dinner modestly nearby, as birthday dinners goes, 50th birthday dinners go. Certainly, I think it was pretty modest. And my youngest son, who's got my dad's steak eating gene, which who knows how that goes for us later in life. But my dad's doing okay, so maybe we'll be able to digest that much red meat too. Anyway, we went out and he saw the biggest. I want the biggest steak we can get. Essentially, and this place had we split it. It was this big steak for two things. So it was a huge thrill for him to see this gigantic piece of meat. Those of you who are vegans and vegetarians, I'm sure, are outraged. I'm sorry. But it was very interesting. It was fun to see. He had a good time. I had a good time. It was this Flintstone-sized thing on our plate with a giant rib, a bone-in ribeye. It was an enormous thing. So we wished we had a dog so that people could judge our dog's non-vegetarianism, I guess, would be the reason to do something like that. Lots to catch up on, and there was lots of ketchup on the steak, as it happens. My son eats steak like Donald Trump, another source of everlasting shame, but I assume he'll grow out of it. My son, too. And, it was a big day. By the time we left the restaurant, we were hearing that, let's see, on Saturday, the news was that John McCain had died. I have no guidance for you on the death of John McCain. I have no comment to make on the death of John McCain by now. And really, honestly, the moment you found out, you knew what you thought. Maybe you felt one way, maybe you felt the other, maybe you had mixed feelings. Certainly, the rest of social media lectured you on what your feelings ought to be, or had to let you know what their feelings were. I've been kind of studiously avoiding that because I don't know. So, yeah, I got, there's things there's people who mourned his passing who have a point. There are people who celebrated his passing, I guess, who have a point. And I can't help you decide it. You likely know already. I'm certainly not going to change anybody's mind. The only thing I can say about it is it's the last time that we can make the joke that this is good news for John McCain. And that in itself is news good news for John McCain. I think he would have actually appreciated the joke. For anybody who would get upset that how could you joke at a time like this, I think he would have enjoyed having one last good news for John McCain joke, although I imagine he never enjoyed that joke in his lifetime. But maybe now, at the end, he can come to appreciate it. Donald Trump, of course, has found a way, and did find a way very quickly, to make John McCain's death about him, which quite honestly is something I support. I wish that death had been about him. That would have been fantastic as far as I'm concerned. But it wasn't. It was about John McCain. And he had to find a way to make it his by not issuing a statement. Apparently, the White House pro forma, prepared a statement in which they said all the things that you normally would say from a normal White House about John McCain, all of which, is debatable, but that's what White Houses do. American hero, mourn the passing, heart, thoughts and prayers, all the things that go into it. Like I said, it's pro forma, but there's a reason it's the forma, but Trump does none of the forma. And apparently he blocked the release of an actual normal person statement from the White House. And instead, I think he did issue a tweet and said some of the dumb things that you normally say upon someone's passing like that. But I note for the record, as others did, Mark Knoller, CBS News reporter at the White House, taking careful note of the fact that the flag was back at full staff this morning. The normal practice usually would be keeping it at half staff, apparently until interment, and interment, not internment. I mean, that's not what we had in store for him. And they just, whatever. We don't know the protocol. We don't care the protocol. This is a day of independence. I don't know what he was going to say about this for the rest of the week, but he's not playing along. He never does. He's a jackass. What can you do? Anyway, moving on to the rest of the news, we are also, before I hand things over to Greg, we are also, once again, and I think I counted on Twitter how many times I either used this phrase or one like it, or noted in the show summary that we were covering a mass shooting on the podcast today. I think this is the 19th time that our social media tweet of the contents of the show will make note of the fact that we had to discuss another mass shooting. That was Sunday, so it mostly kept Trump quiet. McCain died. There was a mass shooting. The guy who did the mass shooting was white, so Trump had nothing to say about it. So it was a relatively quiet weekend. I was glad for it. Now let's see what's coming up in the noise and the news. Greg, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning.
Okay. It's good so far. What sort of, news things happened?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about McCain because I think that's sort of
one
important.
Of them. It is. I just can't offer any guidance.
As far as
on
what
it.
happened in Florida, still news coming out because it's so recent, but apparently a gamer got ticked off that he lost and decided to, take out some of the competition.
And I guess those guys kind of, in a way, they train for that all the time in their shooter games. But this was a football game.
Yeah,
it wasn't
still
supposed to.
And these are professional gamers who are there from all over the world. Who, non-Americans are horrified by the whole thing. Americans are horrified by the whole thing.
Yeah, they're like, well, we're not coming back. And competitions will be elsewhere.
So, of course, Donald Trump, tweets about things like mainstream media tries to rewrite history for credit Obama for Trump accomplishments. He wrote, since President Trump took office, the economy is booming. The stronger the economy gets, the more desperate his critics are. Had the weakest recovery since the Great Depression, which is a quote that he took out of the Washington Times, which is a conservative-friendly newspaper.
Yes.
And then he wrote, over 90% approval rating for your all-time favorite, I hope, president within the Republican Party, and 52% overall. Of course, the 52% overall is disapprove, so we got that wrong. This despite all the media made-up stories by the fake news media trying endlessly to make me look as bad and evil as possible. Look at the real villains, please.
Please.
That was pretty bad.
That's, that's par for the course. It's half wrong. Actually, half wrong is pretty good for him, but... Yeah, and of course, the longest recovery, of course, it really doesn't take that much to point out that if it's the longest recovery in history, how long is that? Isn't it longer than you've been here? Isn't the vast majority of that Obama's recovery if it's got to belong to a president? Yes, but unacknowledged.
Yeah, I am entirely responsible for a 10-year recovery.
Right. And he would say, I've been claiming credit for it for 10 years. What's the problem?
What is the problem there? So, that is the problem there. And, of course, he didn't mention a word about McCain. The only thing he said about McCain at the time is he tweeted condolences to the family.
Yeah.
Which specifically refused to talk about McCain himself. And then, of course, there's this whole incident with the flag. So, it's got people fairly upset about that because that's really just not the right thing to do, another norm-breaking thing. And John McCain was an incredibly complicated person.
Yes, I guess.
But in that sense, unique and not one of those cookie-cutter candidates in a box. He was the exact opposite. And so when you're an iconoclast, people are going to have all sorts of different opinions about you.
Well, I guess that would stand to reason.
Nick Anderson had a wonderful cartoon, which I led off the Pundit Roundup with. It's McCain coming up the escalator to come to heaven. Of course, God's waiting for him.
That's Santa Claus.
A cheery God.
Yeah.
Who looks like Santa Claus, because, who knows? But God says, I like people who aren't narcissistic a-holes.
It's funny, but the coarsening of God's discourse, I'm very concerned.
You're thinking New Testament, and go back to Old Testament. He could be pretty rough on people.
He was a salty God.
Yeah, he was a salty guy, exactly. So what I wrote is, if this were a movie, John McCain's death and celebration of his life would cause a number of Republican senators to find their backbone in his honor, starting with his Senate best friend Lindsey Graham. Don't hold your breath. This isn't a movie.
Right, Lindsey,
hold
your breath.
One of the things that it usually happens in something like this is that people then start to tell their own personal stories about how they met him, how they knew him, and stuff like that. This one is really good. I really liked it.
All right.
Cody Keenan was a 22-year-old Senate intern. He was waiting for the elevator.
Yeah.
The doors open, and he and another GOP senator were inside, McCain, that is. So this 22-year-old Senate intern apologizes and said, I'd wait for the next one. I guess that's protocol.
Okay.
Since they were discussing something.
Oh, yes, right. Okay, sure.
Right? But McCain said, no, hop on.
All right.
And McCain said to the intern, so who do you work for? The intern said, Ted Kennedy, sir. And McCain said, he's a good man. Without him, we're lost. The other senator scoffed in disgust and got off the elevator at the next floor. And while he was still in earshot, McCain raised his voice and said, don't mind him. He's an asshole. And that's the time I met John McCain. And that's how a lot of people remember him.
Yes.
That's why with this flag thing, it was interesting. Andrea Mitchell from NBC tweeted the thing about the White House flag back at full staff. And I sent you that picture that one could see of the White House in the foreground with the flag at full staff, but the Washington Monument in the background with the flags at half staff.
Yeah, he's going to get angry.
Just to make a point, right. But Andrea Mitchell tweeted that story
and she was
with the hashtag no respect.
All right.
So don't forget, John McCain's base was the media.
That's true.
So Trump is really making a mistake by taking them off. These are people that buy ink by the barrel, so to speak.
Yes. And he's going to have to invite them to a lot of barbecues to win them back.
Trump? Yeah, I think they would not go. Just like, how bad a person do you have to be to get disinvited to a funeral?
Is it your funeral?
If it's my funeral, he's disinvited, but he was disinvited.
Oh, I see. Yes. Right. Well, now that would be the ultimate is getting disinvited to your own funeral.
Your own funeral, yeah. We're having a funeral, but this guy is so bad, he's not even invited. He can't come.
I mean, that may be happening. I think Donald Trump is late to his own funeral.
Right. We'll inter somebody else.
Yeah. All right. Well, that you would have to be pretty bad, and this is the second one he's been conspicuously, if not disinvited, not invited to.
But interestingly, again, to give you an idea how complicated he was, that the people who were asked to do eulogies are George W. Bush and Barack Obama.
Presidents.
Yes, but also people who defeated him.
Okay. Yes.
So, complicated guy. What else I wrote? I said he made huge mistakes like Sarah Palin. None of us on our side are ever going to forget him, picking Sarah Palin and elevating her.
Yeah.
But he was a genuine iconoclast who could surprise you. I would take him over any other current Republican senator you can name, and this is going to be controversial, but I said especially those with the character of a Susan Collins or Bob Corker. Now, can you imagine them opposing their party and being the vote that killed a bill that Mitch McConnell wanted? Yes, Susan Collins voted no on the ACA repeal, Senator Murkowski. But would she have been, if she were the only Republican no vote, if she were the deciding vote, do we think that she would have voted against what Mitch McConnell wanted? McCain would have, because he thought it was wrong and would hurt his constituency, and he did.
Yes, he did.
Collins looks for cover. So
True.
Whatever McCain was, he wasn't a coward. But this also, I wrote, he was not representative of the Republican Party. Not anymore. That party died with him.
That it certainly is also dead. I don't know whether it died earlier, but the death, you might as well announce it now.
It's gone. That's
That's
you have
true.
people like Bob Corker, who's head of the very powerful, in theory, Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who says, tut, that's too bad. Oh, well, I wish it were different.
Huh.
That's, what is that?
Gosh, that's ducking getting swatted by Trump. Yeah.
So, when it comes to memorializing, which I'm not going to do, I'm just, trying to point out, you got to talk about all the aspects of his political life. A very interesting, we remember the Arab comment that he made to the lady who was trying to claim that Obama was an Arab, and McCain said, no, he's a good man. He's just somebody who I disagree with. Michael Cohen, the columnist, not Michael Cohen, the shyster lawyer.
Says who?
Exactly. Had a really interesting tweet storm a little bit about this short one, but I thought it was worth going over. He says, some thoughts on John McCain. Whatever one thinks about him as a politician, more on that in a second. Michael Cohen, by the way, is a liberal columnist. His courage during the Vietnam War is unparalleled and awe-inspiring. Every accolade that he receives as a hero because of his actions during his 5.5 years in captivity is richly deserved. For that alone, he should be considered a heroic figure and a truly great American. In some respects, I think McCain's most noble public act was his efforts, along with John Kerry, to open diplomatic relations with Vietnam in the 1990s. And I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for it. There's another example of McCain not holding a grudge. Not against W, not against Obama. Trump's a different story.
Yes.
And that's, highlighting how he normally is. And his reaction to Trump, just puts it in relief, fast relief. And there's a reason why so many people loved and admired him, says Cohen. He had a genuineness, a wicked sense of humor, and a level of candor that's resonated. Other stories circulating, this has been repeated countless times by younger people who would introduce, his or her significant other to McCain. McCain would invariably, turn to one of them and said, "You're making a huge mistake." That was just his
favorite joke.
Do it. But if we're being honest, and I mean John McCain
Cindy,
honest, as Michael
let me
Cohen,
tell you. Okay, yes.
far less courageous in his life as a politician. One thing I find so striking about McCain is that so many of the courageous mavericky political acts that people point to came after he did the wrong thing. He supported campaign finance reform. Feingold McCain, right? After getting caught in the Keating 5 scandal.
Yes.
He came out and apologized for equivocating on the Confederate flag issue during the 2000 primary in South Carolina.
Okay.
After the primary was over.
Yes.
He was a courageous no vote on Obamacare repeal after voting against Obamacare in 2009 and even worse, contributing to the worsening political polarization of the Obama years. Yes. He would end up later saying he should have picked Joe Lieberman as his running mate, but he did select Palin and never really took responsibility for that decision, which in some respects helped get us Donald Trump. Yes. Whatever you think of McCain, even if you love him, the choice of Palin is a black stain on his record that can never be quite washed off. He took away his endorsement of Trump after the Access Hollywood tape emerged in October 2016, but up to the point had continued to support him, even though Trump had mocked his service as a POW. Had McCain done the right thing and endorsed Hillary, who knows how 2016 would have turned out. Then There's the fact that McCain was an unreconstructed hawk who supported every military intervention in the last 25 years. He'd be a brave voice against torture in the U.S. Senate, but that can't quite wash away the stink of having supported the Iraq War in the first place. True. The thing that McCain always struck out to me is how so much of his behavior was motivated by anger. He was a thorn in the side to W because he was pissed about losing the nomination to him. He was a thorn in the side to Obama because he was furious over losing the election. He dropped the anvil on Obamacare repeal, in part, I'm sure, because of his personal antipathy toward Trump. So he has a slightly different view of me, of what I have in regard to McCain. I think McCain is a forgive and remember kind of guy.
Huh.
He never forgets the slights, but, he tends to forgive over time. You just got to give him time, sometimes a decade. But above all, see Vietnam. But above all, McCain's anger seemed to manifest itself the greatest when it came to his own perceived inadequacies. When he didn't live up to the image he'd constructed of himself, the honor that he believed his public service should embody, he in effect beat himself up. In some ways, McCain was poorly cast as a politician. He was raised with a sense of military honor. Probably that didn't benefit a life in politics, and not GOP politics. All of this is to say we do no justice to McCain's life to treat him like a saint. He wasn't one. He was a flawed and complicated man, equally courageous and self-serving, always reflective. Our politics was unquestionably richer by having him in our public life. That's the position I take. And while I rarely agree with him, I'll dearly miss him. He's an interesting man, and there are a few better words that can be said about a person when they die. One more thing. There's a lot of terrible things that Donald Trump has said and done, but denigrating John McCain's experience as a POW ranks up there as among the worst. When you think about what John McCain was subjected to for anybody, particularly a person seeking to be president, to make fun of it is just beyond the pale. The Trump's candidacy survived that statement, and that same partisan who voted for McCain in 2008 voted for Trump in 2016. That should bring eternal shame to the Republican Party. I remind you, Michael Cohen wrote a very, very good book about the 60s, 1968 specifically. So he's well-versed in the whole Vietnam era ethos and what was going on at the time. Mm-hmm. I remember it. Cohen wrote about it. McCain lived it. And yeah, I think all of that is true. A complicated person, you got to look at him in complicated ways.
Okay. Yeah, you have to. I mean, you literally have no choice.
So, that's that. You got anything else to say, McCain?
There's only one side to whether he died. I can tell you that. So I can't both sides that one.
Okay.
No, I have nothing to add. I mean, he's too complicated as you point out, and I'm not a big observer of John McCain's, and so I'm not moved to eulogize him. That's for sure.
So next, what happens is the governor of Arizona, who is a conservative, who is more an establishment conservative than, let's say, Kelly Ward. Yes. Who's running against Martha McSally and Joe Arpaio for a Senate position to replace Jeff Flake.
Yes.
So Kelly Ward said over the weekend, right before he died, that the only reason he's announcing this is he wants to interfere with my campaign.
I don't even understand that. I saw that go by, and I couldn't imagine how you get to make that announcement.
So you're trying to replace John McCain with Kelly Ward, and that, in a nutshell, is the Republican Party in 2018.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Arizona. Well,
Arizona. So Arizona. Here's the thing. So now you have a conservative Republican governor.
Yes.
And the way that the mechanism of this works is that he can appoint a replacement for McCain anytime he wants.
Yeah.
But he has announced he's not doing it until the flags come back to full mast everywhere except the White House.
Okay. So
he will do it after the interment, not internment, but interment. And then he'll appoint somebody. The question's going to be, does he appoint somebody? Because the Arizona GOP is split between the establishment and the Trumpsters.
Right. So
does he appoint somebody who essentially is going to be a caretaker position? I guess he has to be whoever it is, he or she has to be reelected in 2020, if I got that right. I don't remember that part. But has to run again.
Well, they do.
Gets to fill out his position
right.
and then gets
whenever
to run again.
Whenever McCain would have had to run for re-election.
But do you appoint somebody who wants that job and will run again, or do you appoint somebody like a Cindy McCain, for the sake of argument, that's been thrown around but is highly unlikely?
Yeah,
that will only be clearly a placeholder. John Kyle, who resigned but is available.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, but do you do that and say, okay, I'm going to hold this place as a conservative Republican until the election that has to happen, or am I going to appoint somebody who wants that position, giving them a leg up? But if you do that, you're likely to annoy one side or the other side of your particular state party. So he's got to juggle those things in deciding who it is he's going to appoint. It's not obvious who he's going to do.
Right. Okay. Well, he's got to make up his mind about something, but he can take his time. And that's a good question. And do you? There's all sorts of things that would go into that, including
like politics.
Well, yeah, all sorts of and personal politics and statewide politics. Do you appoint someone who wants the job, and is it somebody who wants to campaign to keep the job, but that Donald Trump wouldn't like and therefore wouldn't endorse? And I'm not certain what the effect of that is. And they might calculate, if they were interested in such things in Arizona. If I appoint someone from the traditionalist side of the party, it will perhaps anger Trump or Trump supporters, but will Trump endorse them anyway, like Luther Strange, or will he say, I'm coming to endorse, some other wacko that I like better, and do they want him in the state? So there's a lot of moving parts, and I don't know whether they're going to bother giving any consideration to trying to predict Trump. We will see. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg and I puzzling out with the help of Vox, that Vox explained to us, first of all, what is an election? What is the United States? We got all that out of the way. And we figured out. Is
he a Republican? What's his role?
Right.
But yeah, what happens is you serve until the next general election, which is 2020. Mm-hmm. And then you serve the rest of McCain's 6-year term, which ends in 2022. And then so you got to run like every 2 years, like you're a congressman.
Yeah, but statewide.
Now, and if you and don't forget, this is happening at the time that the Jeff Flake replacement, which is Democrat Kirsten Sinema, running against McSally probably, but possibly Ward and, oh my God, Arpaio. I mean, that's all still going on too.
Yeah.
So it's a real mess. And then, of course, if Ducey reports anybody that McCain liked, if he replaces him with anybody that McCain liked, then Trump will go nuts.
Yeah. So, right. So he may draw
Trump
him into
McCain.
the state.
I mean, it's obvious Trump hates McCain.
Yeah. And he may want to campaign against anybody that McCain would have approved of. And so the governor will have a lot to think about. Which side of the still existing Republican Party do I want to piss off here? And if it's the Trump faction, do I want to do something that's going to draw Trump to come and campaign frequently in Arizona, for one thing? I guess the other thing is, someone will be named as a replacement. They'll stand in the general election of 2020 with presumably Trump on the ballot, unless he's been removed by then or, has too many steaks and scoops of ice cream. And So Trump will be could possibly be on the ballot. This other person will run again in 2020 and again in 2022, which at a minimum means Joe Arpaio threatens to be on the ballot for the Senate for the next 3 elections in Arizona, which gives him life, which is problematic, but that wasn't John McCain's intention. He didn't intend to do it that way. But you're going to have a 6-year running circus of lunacy in Arizona, and it's a bit of a tinderbox as it is.
And now, according to the Vox piece, the Arizona Republic listed a number of names that have been floated as potential appointees to replace McCain. They include Sidney McCain, the late senator's wife. The trouble is, she could represent her husband's legacy, and that's exactly what Republicans don't want. So I don't see that happening. They don't want another Maverick. They don't want McCain's legacy. They want to, extirpate McCain's legacy. Then there's Kirk Adams. He's 45. Sidney McCain is 64. Kirk Adams is Governor Ducey's chief of staff and a former state lawmaker, and ran unsuccessfully for Congress in 2012.
Yeah, well,
so he's a possibility as well. He would be a caretaker kind of position, but supportive of the governor.
Yes. All right. Well, I mean, I guess that would be a smart political play personally for the governor, although I don't know how popular it would be to say.
Well, it might avoid a fight, so it might be smart politically as well. The other thing, and again, the relationship between the governor and the senator can be interesting. I think of Nevada and Dean Heller, and his governor Sandoval fighting over Affordable Care Act, with them taking opposite positions. So having a senator in your own party who actually supports some of your positions, or at least is sympathetic to them, can be quite useful.
Okay. Yes, it's a helpful thing to do. It's good for your machine,
Yeah, a lot of things.
Right.
Makes you a kingmaker, helps your own reelection, all that stuff.
It's all the bad stuff.
All the bad stuff, but if you're the one making the decision, those are the things that go into making a decision. And don't forget, he is a Republican.
Right. So,
which is not fair. He is a politician. They both would do this kind of thing.
Yes.
Anyway, so there's those two names. Then there's Barbara Barrett, 67, chair of the Aerospace Corporation and former U.S. ambassador to Finland. She was the first woman Republican to run for governor of Arizona in 1994.
Okay. That's a thing.
Right? Or John Kyle, 76, who served alongside McCain in the Senate. And then there's a bunch of real estate developers. Who are also mentioned in the article.
What else is there?
Because when you come to Republican politics, it's car dealers and real estate people.
And certainly in Arizona. So, okay, well.
An interesting angle they also point out, one possible contender would have been Republican Representative Martha McSally. She's already running.
Yes.
All right, and if you appoint her, then you make the Kelly Ward side mad.
Yes.
But even worse, if you appoint her, then it's Kelly Ward versus Arpaio for that position, and whoever wins gets clobbered by Kristen Sinema. So you lose the seat if you make McSally her McCain's replacement.
Okay, yes.
So he's not going to do that.
All right,
That would be truly a no-win situation. That would be like the dumbest thing to do. You get everybody mad at you and you lose the seat.
Strongly considering that. That's
exactly
the
right.
Dumbest possible thing. That's good. It's like,
how
much dumber could this be? And the answer is none. Yeah, okay. Don't do it.
Well, short term.
All right.
It doesn't make any difference who's there, because whoever's there is just going to follow the Republican line. It doesn't make Kavanaugh, for example, more or less likely to be confirmed.
Not much, no.
Not much, really. And it really doesn't make any difference short term. The only argument you could make, and I don't see this happening, is that without McCain, what if you resurrect repeal Obamacare just in time for the election? Because now you have a McCain upvote instead of a McCain downvote.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is it would be the most incredibly stupid thing to do just before the election because, Obamacare's popular.
Well, what do they care?
Well, they would like to keep the House.
They think it will. They think it's a winner.
And they don't really want the Senate to fall over this. So that would be dumb. So if you're talking about the two dumbest things to do, that's on your list. appoint McSally or try to repeal Obamacare again.
Yeah, well, okay.
Right, so
there's
just keep
two
that in mind,
opportunities
'cause
for dumbness.
things happen.
All right, just collecting the dumb opportunities.
Right. All right, in other news, NBC Wall Street Journal has pulled out from yesterday. Trump is steady, but here's some interesting tidbits within that poll, the write-up from NBC, this I have in the pundit roundup. Despite the durability of Trump's approval, and you know what, just for convenience for you, why don't I just put it right at the bottom of our running list we have on Skype, so that we can actually
hear the
read along. There we go.
All right.
Despite the durability of Trump's approval, even after one of the most dire weeks of his presidency, and this is something we need to talk about, because don't forget last week was Cohen and Manafort and all that other stuff. Most voters are not convinced. Most voters are not convinced that Trump himself is completely insulated from the legal woes of his associates. His approval ratings didn't drop after last week, and I got another really interesting story on that. Asked if they believe that the 6 Trump associates who have pled guilty or been found guilty of crime signals only that those individuals committed crimes, or that Trump himself may have participated in wrongdoing?
No.
27% cite just the individuals, not Trump. 40% say Trump may be involved, and 30% don't know. Okay. This goes back to my contention that if you have people that don't know, just like that juror with the Manafort case, who's a MAGA person and thinks the whole thing is a witch hunt, nonetheless, when presented with evidence, voted guilty on all charges. If you have 30% who don't know, that means they do know, but they just want to see it.
All right. It could be.
And if you show it to them, if you show them a Mueller report that says, yep, he was involved, that'll sway people. The majority of voters also say that Trump has not been honest and truthful when it comes to the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. 21% strongly agree he's been honest and truthful. 17% agree somewhat, 10% disagree, and a plurality, 46%, disagree strongly.
Well, they're right.
There you have it, right there. I mean, the 21% strongly agree that Trump is truthful, and 46% strongly disagree. That's basically the strong approval, strong disapproval numbers.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty strong. I was going to say it's entirely likely that there's that 30% or so who might just need to see evidence. But I was thinking there's probably a 30% chance that had Trump been on that jury, he might have voted guilty just out of confusion or not. I voted for Manafort.
He voted for lunch.
You know, that's possibly true. He would have certainly delayed things another day to get a free lunch out of it. But it's entirely possible they don't know what it means to vote on those things.
Right. Well, you were going to say that about the 30%, but of course I wouldn't let you because that's like Kagro in the morning tradition.
Right.
Inside those numbers, however, there's some evidence that Republican defense of Trump's truthfulness is relatively soft. Among Democrats, 81% strongly disagree that Trump has been honest. Among Republicans, just 46% strongly agree that he's been honest. So again, there's a lot more strength in the I don't like him, I don't believe him, I don't trust him group than the strong approvers. And just about half, 53% of Republicans, say the guilty pleas by Trump's associates are limited only to those individuals and not the president, while a third, 35%, don't know enough to say. Again, you got a third of Republicans who don't know enough to say. They are persuadable.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, the generic ballots now back up to 8 from 6.
No.
In that poll.
Yeah, well, a couple of convictions will do that to you.
Yep. So we have that. We have some lovely rants here about how corrupt Trump is. This one is from Peter Wehner, who was an ex-Bushy. This is an interesting observation by Amy Walter, which I think is worth exploring. The original observation was by Dave Drucker. Republicans saying that Democrats, and this goes to a conversation I was having with Thelonious, I guess both on the air and over Twitter. Republicans saying Democrats will impeach Trump isn't really about motivating their base. It's about souring independent voters on Democrats.
Okay.
Independents aren't fans of partisan debate. Just here are the problems I'm facing. What are you going to do about it? So if you say, well, Democrats, all they want to do is go after Trump, what you're trying to do is poison the mind of independents against Democrats. They're not interested in you. They just want to, follow their own, vendetta.
Okay.
Right? And Amy Walter takes that observation and says this, and Dems agree with that analysis, which is why they're shutting down impeachment talk.
Okay.
But Republicans trying to go Democrats into impeach rhetoric also serves to remind independents about what they already hate about Trump, the constant drama, the chaos that he creates.
Right.
So for Republicans to keep talking about impeachment and for Democrats not to talk about impeachment sounds like a win-win.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, if that's going to be the strategy, I think, yeah, for this president, maybe uniquely, I'm not 100% certain that I agree that independents are turned off by the prospect. It might not be what they want to spend their time on, but I don't know that there's a plurality of independents who view the prospect of removing Donald Trump from office being a net negative in under a Democratic Congress. It might not be what motivates them to vote for Democrats, but I don't think they see that as a huge drawback.
I can answer that question somewhat.
Okay.
Because we have civics polling.
Yeah, and I mean it'll depend on the phrasing of the question. Certainly, is that your sole priority? Is that okay with you?
Would you support or oppose impeaching Donald Trump? That's the question.
Okay, fair enough. Good.
Right, and 48% oppose and 46% support today's numbers.
Okay.
And if you look at independents only, 48% oppose and 43% support.
So, there we go.
So there is no overwhelming independent desire to impeach him. I think they're like the juror. I think they're like the 35% wait and see. You got to show them something.
Yeah. No, I would have expected.
They'll change their mind.
Yeah. Now, I think for the argument of the piece to hold, I would have expected to see, 40%, possibly less, in favor of impeachment. The fact that it's very nearly split, I think, says to me it's that argument that the Republicans are making has less power than it's ever had before. And by the way, it keeps having to be made because Republican presidents are horrible.
Yes.
So this is old ground here. Had the question been, a number of years ago, and the subject George W. Bush, I expect you would have seen, in the 30s possibly, for impeachment of George W. Bush among independents. I guess we could look it up, but who wants to do that? Let's just have that statement stand as truth.
Right. Anyway, so NBC News, Wall Street Journal poll eventually comes to the conclusion Trump approval remarkably stable after a stormy week of bad news, but 56% of voters say Trump has not been honest and truthful about the Mueller probe. So I think that in the end, you really have to give Mueller the space to finish what he's doing. And when he presents stuff, even if he does it in piecemeal, sort of as we go along, these things do have an impact.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to Dave Drucker, because he was the one that was talking about the independents and what they mean for the midterms.
All right.
And he says, this crucial bloc is frowning on President Trump and showing signs of resisting Republican leadership of the Congress, according to public opinion polls. If that sentiment hardens and independents throw their votes to the Democrats, the GOP could suffer a titanic defeat on November 6th. Republicans charged with holding the line are beginning to worry. When you get a wave, it's because independents went decisively one way or the other. Has that begun to occur? Are they thinking through things? Said David Winston, a Republican pollster who counsels the party's congressional leadership. Independents aren't fans of partisan debate. Just here's the problems. He's the one that made that quote. And for Republicans, independent voters could be the difference between a subpar midterm or a wave that sweeps the party out of power. So all that is important. Among independents, Trump's job approval rating was a paltry 36%, and the Democrats enjoyed a yawning 22-point lead, 48-26 in the generic ballot in the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll conducted July 15th to 18th. Then they just had this other one here. I haven't had a chance to look it up and see what it is in that one. Among all voters in the survey, the president's approval rating was 45, and the Democrat generic ballot lead was 49-43, which is a manageable 6 points. But again, not among independents. Independents, it was 22 points.
Yeah,
But independents haven't made up their mind yet. And so the whole thing is, what's going to happen? Well, you know what? I would argue that little things may make a bigger difference than big things. That is to say,
yes.
you can convict Manafort, and you can convict Cohen, and you can get word that David Pecker from National Enquirer and the CFO from the Trump Organization have gained immunity, although you don't quite know what that means yet. You know it's big because they know information. You can get all of that. That's not going to move the needle. But Trump being a complete and total asshole to John McCain might, because that's the kind of thing that really gets independents ticked off.
Yes, because I don't know, but it's true. It is. I don't know if it's sad. I don't know if I need to condemn it in any way. It's just that's what moves those guys. I mean, I guess it. And it's if you ask yourself who's independent in the face of Donald Trump, I suppose that is a good starting point. Like, well, gee whiz, I don't know. I got to see more evidence. You know, okay. Well, you're a patient person, but yeah.
But this is evidence.
Clearly, not somebody who sits and analyzes every step.
I got my life to lead. I got stuff to do. But man, this is making the news, and I just heard about this, and I don't like this.
And it's a flag thing.
This
I don't know.
This is
That's
not appropriate.
knee-jerk.
This is disrespecting the flag.
Yeah, right. That's. I guess it is. Right. So yeah, that will disturb them. Good, fine. I mean, they should be disturbed by Trump himself, and this is the sort of thing that makes him say, "Enough with this guy already." That's why I'd be concerned if I were them, but I'm not so good.
This article ends with the president, in a move GOP strategists say is a play to topple red state Democrats running for re-election to the Senate, is prosecuting a culture war campaign that appeals to the conservative base. Tariffs don't, though. That's going to screw them there. It's just the sort of approach that has Democrats confident about winning control of the House, a battle that runs through suburban America where independents are poised to tip the scales. Teflon Don is the worst media trope. He's toxic with the independent and moderate voters who will decide these swing districts, the Democratic operatives said. So we'll see.
Yes.
I think
when
that's
do we
right,
get
but
to see
it?
Yeah. Well, it's looming. That's all I can say. The time is coming.
The time is coming. All right. So basically, that's my report for today.
Okay.
You got the rest of the show. It's up to you now.
Well, I'm not going to do any more. By the way, I'm done. I figure we should just stop at this point. We should appoint a caretaker, and I'll see you again in 2020.
My favorite senator to beat up on, Susan Collins, said, "The Lions are gone. The Lions of the Senate are gone. It's very sad." And Josh Chaffetz, who's a political professor of law, Cornell Law School, and author of Congress's Constitution, says, "Senator, be the lion you want to see in the world."
That's true.
Yes, I know this sounds a bit glib, he says, but as James Wallner has been pointing out, albeit not precisely in those terms, this is optimal lioning time for GOP senators. Each one of them has a hell of a lot of leverage over the leadership. So whether you're talking about Jeff Flake or Senator Collins, now's the time. Stop complaining about McCain not being there. Step up to the plate. Honor him. Get yourself a backbone.
That is true. Now is the time. And there is some additional leverage. The numbers begin to change. We can talk about that a little bit and explain a few things about what it does and doesn't mean in terms of leverage for Democrats. But it clearly creates an opportunity for Republicans. It's an easy place to make an impact in the Senate, period. And now even more so.
Oh, I'm going to leave you with this for you to do because I just thought you'd have fun with it. It's a piece by Ariel Edwards Levy. It's in the Huffington Post. Okay. And remember that big news cycle that we were just talking about with Manafort and Cohen, et cetera?
Yes. That
all happened on Tuesday. So this piece is, we asked 1,000 people what happened on Tuesday, and here's what some of them said.
Okay. Right. That was just straight up what happened on Tuesday?
Yeah.
That was the actual question.
Yeah. What do you know about the news on Tuesday? It's
sure
through YouGov polling. So
okay.
Some of the responses are kind of funny, but anyway, I'll leave that with you. You can play with it or not as you see fit. You can look at it next break and decide what you want to do with it.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the microphone is yours. I'll stop interrupting you, but I'll be back on Wednesday to interrupt you again.
Excellent.
This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend Kagro in the morning. And thanks so much for listening, folks. Lots of news, and we'll try to deal with it.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens Tuesday. That's tomorrow.
Yes,
okay. That's the whole point of it. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. We'll see you on Wednesday. By the way, I didn't interrupt at the time, though I should have. You see, one of the phrases this is the most amazing phrase struck me just falling out from your reading of, I don't know which of the articles was it, but I guess they were talking about the impact on independence. That must have been the last article of the convictions of Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort. And the phrase of it was, I guess, were they paying attention to the woes of his associates? I was just sort of thinking, that really, you have to be, imagine a non-English speaker, first language, trying to keep up with that and the way we slur our words together. Woes of his associates, and who I think, by the way, was the name of the last communist premier of Poland. But we weren't mean to confuse you with that. But that, I don't know, somehow that struck me. The woes of his associates. Say that 10 times fast. It's fine if you're an English speaker, but what a weird thing that must sound like. I imagine that's what, I want to take that phrase to Iceland with me next time. They think it's so hilarious to name their different volcanoes and watch us struggle with trying to figure it out because it's just a couple of words strung together. Well, if you know Icelandic words, it's not difficult. Woes of his associates. It's simple, but try and say that or try and decipher what we were just saying without closed captioning, and I think you'd be in trouble. Okay. Anyway, lots of stories to catch up on, a couple of comments to catch up on. Some questions to answer. Let's see what's going on. The Twitter machine will help us out with that. There's been a couple of comments. Matthew Rigdon noting, let's see. Let's see. What's your last comment here, Matt? Arizona's governor can appoint someone to take McCain's seat. He's only waiting until after the funeral to take that step, so the Senate will have 51 senators as soon as next week. Or sooner if norms really don't matter anymore. So there's not a great big window of opportunity to operate in a 99-person Senate, which, changes the numbers slightly with respect to what does it take to get to a majority. But I bring that up only because that would impact, for instance, the question I have here from another listener, and let's open this one up. How will we refer to you by? I never know whether to start with the Twitter handle you'd have to type in order to search the person up to find them. I guess that makes the most sense. Triceps Lipano, which sounds like a gangster name. I like that a lot. But it's Julie Lipano, Lappano, Triceps Lipano, and I like that. That's fantastic too. Most people would immediately, their old brains go to, well, Triceps Lipano sounds like it must be a guy, right? Well, it isn't, because guess what? Everybody has triceps, and sometimes women train them just as much as men. So I don't know whether that's do you lift weights? Is that one of your hobbies, or is that just kind of a funny thing, or what? I don't know. Anyway, good for you, whether you do or not. Here's the question. Is this feasible? This has nothing to do with their triceps at all. Is this feasible? My indivisible group, who we're talking about here, isn't sure whether to pressure around this. And it is this question. It's been floated before, and it's floating again, and we've addressed it to some extent on the show, but let's see. She's retweeting Joe Barry, Barri, just a guy out there hanging out and doing his thing. As I don't mean to imply that he's like some famous prognosticator. He's like you and me, and so is Julie. Joe Barry is circulating this. What do we call it? This strategy thought, which has come up before. I'll just read it to you his way. The Constitution provides the Senate must have a majority of its members. That's 51. That was 51 on Friday. It's 50 now. That's one of the things that changes. The Constitution provides the Senate must have a majority of its members, usually 51, present to conduct business. And that's true-ish, right? That do I do running commentary all along the way? Or do I read through it and then start from the top? How about that? Constitution provides the Senate must have a majority of its members present to conduct business. Without McCain, the GOP only has 50. If Schumer is even half of McConnell, he'll hold all 49 Dem senators, it's 47 plus 2 independents, but whatever, out of the Senate to prevent a vote on Kavanaugh. Refusing to be part of a quorum should be easier than voting against 4 red state Dems, Jones and Manchin. Given McConnell's refusal to hold any hearings on Garland, GOP is hiding Kavanaugh's record and Trump's illegitimacy. Any politician should be able to make the case to constituents. Pence is not a part of this equation. The vice president can only vote to break a tie. The biggest if is whether McCain can remain in office long enough to avoid Arizona's Republican governor from replacing him with an appointee who'll show up and make the quorum. So there's the wrinkle, one of many. So this has been circulating for a while, but I'll continue on because then he updates, I guess, his thread to note on McCain's death. Let's see. Oh, but we are bumping up against the break here. So let's continue to read, and then we'll get through the break, and we'll come back and address the various issues that come along with it. The biggest if is whether McCain can remain in office long enough to avoid the governor replacing him with an appointee who will show up and make the quorum. Here's an opportunity for Corker or Flake to make a major impact simply by not showing up for the vote. Unexpected, to be sure. Still researching, he then says, the extent to which the sergeant at arms of the Capitol Police can arrest absent senators. I can tell you, when I first heard this strategy outlined, I did have to tell people, yeah, that's one of the major issues. You don't need to research the extent to which the sergeant at arms in the Capitol Police can arrest absent senators. The answer is they can arrest absent senators. I mean, slap them in cuffs, whatever it takes, pick them up and carry them onto the floor. That's what they'll do. It doesn't necessarily have to be an arrest per se. But at least people are catching on to this now. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue, I guess, with the analysis of the thread. And I guess Joe has resolved it by coming back around to the reality of things. Yes, first of all, of course, he notes that the death of John McCain makes the whole thing kind of untenable, although it does so in a number of ways. Immediately, the death of McCain leaves the seat vacant, which means that there are 99 members of the Senate, which makes 50 a working majority. It doesn't say anywhere, and this sometimes causes some confusion, is that when you say things like the Constitution provides the Senate must have a majority of its members, parentheses 51, present to conduct business, then people come away with the impression that the Constitution says the Senate must have 51 members present to conduct business. And that is not the case. All it says is that it needs to have a majority of its members. And then Joe went and figured out what constitutes a majority of his members, and the answer is 51, and he puts that in parentheses. And without further explanation, people say things like, it takes 51 senators to make a quorum. It does if there's 100 of them. If there's 99 of them, 50 will do. If you're talking about the early days of the Republic and, the Senate is 26 members, then it's a much different story. And what's the answer of 26? So 14 would make a quorum. That's why they didn't put a number in there. It'll change. And vacancies change that calculation too. But Joe was actually just noting that McCain's death changes the equation because he'll very quickly be replaced in the Senate with whether a caretaker or what have you. A new senator will be appointed, and then that senator will be present, whereas McCain had been absent due to his illness, and then the Republicans wouldn't have as much difficulty mustering their majority. But it does still pose a problem. And though the strategy might not necessarily ever have been feasible for preventing a vote on Kavanaugh, it does still present an opportunity to make things difficult and slow things down a bit, both for votes on Kavanaugh and for everything else. If Democrats are frequently absenting themselves or frequently, really, you don't even have to necessarily absent yourself. Quite honestly, you know, you don't have to break any rules to make a mess of things. But, underlying all of this is the one thing that Joe hints at early on in his thread and says he's researching. The answer is, yeah, there's nothing to research. If you have a quorum call, if you have just a regular everyday quorum call, there's two approaches to quorum calls. One is just the sort of straight up regular quorum call that they use all the time for time wasting purposes. That is when there's nobody seeking time to speak on the Senate floor, but they don't want to go out of session. You're waiting for somebody to show up to make a speech. You know, they said, I'll be there at noon and it's 12:15 and the guy's not there yet. And, you know, you can just say, just any senator from the floor that gets recognized for any purpose can say, I suggest the absence of a quorum. And I guess, so for the technical purposes, we might as well tell everybody, the Senate will not just automatically start checking for quorums at any given time. And though it's true that the Constitution provides that the Senate must have a majority of its members present to conduct business, it is also the case that the Senate assumes that a quorum is present unless someone suggests otherwise. And so if you ever turn on C-SPAN and you see that there are two senators on the floor, and you wonder, hey, I read today that the Constitution says the Senate must have a majority of its members present to conduct business. Why are they conducting business? The answer is they are assuming there's a quorum there until somebody suggests otherwise. The rules of the Senate are such that as soon as somebody says, I suggest the absence of a quorum, there's really nothing ordinarily that the chair can do at that point other than to say the clerk will call the roll. And there's no reason why you wouldn't want to do that. I guess if you're seeing quorum calls being used to waste time, you could get agitated about it. And I suppose that somewhere in the precedents, there's, you know, a story somewhere of a presiding senator saying, no, you know, we just did a quorum call. There is a quorum. This is stupid, and trying to force business to continue without pausing for calling the roll. But it's not a huge problem, and it may be that it never happened because just as it's very simple to put a quorum call in motion, all you have to do is suggest the absence of a quorum, and the chair has to say the clerk will call the roll, and then that familiar roll calling goes, and the clerk calls the names of the senators, usually kind of slowly, alphabetically, and nobody answers because it's just being used as a time-wasting device. If you're doing it because you're waiting for somebody to come to make a speech, or you're just trying to kill time while a deal is being cut on the sidelines or something like that, then you have that slow rolling roll call, the one that used to begin with for many years, Mr. Akaka. But of course, Mr. Akaka no longer with us, so you know he's not at the head. Who's the alphabetically? I don't even know who's alphabetically at the top of the list these days. But if you're an avid C-SPAN watcher, you would know that offhand. I don't know, and I guess do I really care to go and look it up? I don't know. Anyway. The point is that if you're looking to waste time, they just do that slow roll call. If you are the majority leader and you're like, okay, a quorum call has been asked for, and you know we don't really have a whole lot of time that we want wasted, but you know I could allow for 4 or 5 minutes to get wasted. You could read those names a little faster. They can direct the clerk move a little faster, or go breeze right through them and read them as fast as you can. And in the main, quorum calls are not really actually used to see whether a quorum is present. Like I said, it's usually just a time waster. So they let the clerk call the roll slowly for as long as they need, and then one senator can, in the middle at any point in the roll call, say, well, I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the roll call. And, then the presiding officer will look around and, hearing no objection, so ordered. And that's the end of it. So there's a certain amount of time wasting you can do by calling for a roll call, but you need to stick around to object to the suspension of the roll call if you want to waste all of that time. So if you are in a position with a almost evenly divided Senate, in other words, and you're looking to suspend business by denying a quorum, because the Constitution and Senate rules in combination read together also say that if a quorum can't be produced upon it, request for a quorum, or you take a quorum call and they don't answer, and usually they don't, but it's usually, again, because they know they're just wasting time and they're going to suspend the roll call. But if you get to the end of the roll call, if they read Mr. Z, whoever, what's our last senator who starts with a Z, and we don't have one at the moment, I don't think. Then they look up, and the clerk will then at this point say, nobody has answered. And so, we have to do this again and actually get senators to register their presence in some way. And I'm not sure what the rules are for the clerks with respect to noting someone's presence or absence, whether the senator has to make an affirmative acclamation to the chair, or to the clerk anyway, that they're here and are answering for their name in the roll call, or whether it's enough for the clerks to look around, and if you recognize the senators once you've called their name, you mark them down as present. I'm actually not sure about that. You rarely see it happening in a routine roll call because they're not using it for that purpose. So nobody responds. But anyway, if you get to the end of the roll and nobody has responded for whatever reason, then you got a little bit of an issue. The parliamentarian will say, well, technically, we don't have a quorum. And without a quorum, you've got to adjourn for the day. Business is over. And we can come back tomorrow, but we got to adjourn for the day. That would cause a big problem, cause a lot of delays, could delay votes, etc., screw up the whole schedule. So what would happen then, though, is you could do one of two things. You could suggest the absence of a quorum again and just this time say everybody answer, or you could have a live quorum call, which is usually not, you don't usually see a live quorum call as a follow-up to, oops, we had a regular quorum call and nobody answered, so we're going to have a live quorum call. But it's usually a planned event in the main when a live quorum call is used. And it's when, typically, say, the majority leader wants to let senators know that he expects their attendance for a big speech or a big vote, something that's contentious or something that everybody has been anticipating, even if it's not contentious, and you're supposed to be there. And he'll announce ahead of time, we're going to do a live quorum call, which means be here, plan to be here. Anyway, if you get to the end of a live quorum call without a quorum answering present or being noted as present, and whatever the rule may be for the clerks, then you have a real issue, and you might have to adjourn. But it's not the most immediate option. I don't think they have to, at that point, automatically adjourn. You can, at that point, say, you can make a motion to compel the attendance of absent senators, and that's where the Sergeant at Arms and the Capitol Police come in. And just in case you were wondering about, the nuts and bolts and the tricks of it and what it says about it in the Constitution, well, if you can't muster a majority and you can't conduct any business without a quorum, then how do you order the Sergeant at Arms in a valid way to compel the attendance of absent senators if you don't have a quorum and therefore can't conduct business? And the answer is they actually make provision for that in the Constitution. In that same clause where they demand that a quorum, well, one, define a quorum as a majority, and two, insist that a quorum be present in order for them to do any business. It does say, though, a smaller number can, from time to time, can meet or adjourn for the day, schedule the next meeting, or can also compel the attendance of absent senators. So they do make provision for that. They weren't, they didn't overlook that entirely. And, well, I mean, that's just a constitutional provision, and there's really not much to say about it. It says what it says. I'm kind of looking around to see where that section is, and we can kind of read it to you. But is that where we are? It's not there either. Okay, well, I could find you the actual clause and read it just so you know what it says, but I've given you the gist of it, and the important part is, yes, a smaller number. There we are. Article 1, Section 5. So right away in the front there, Clause 1. Each house shall be the judge of its election, the elections, returns, and qualifications of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. And here's the key part. But a smaller number may adjourn from day to day, and may be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each house may provide. So the houses having provided that their sergeant at arms and thereby deputizing the Capitol Police can go and collect them. And yes, it has happened, and yes, it's happened in modern history. And the last one to be, as they note in the histories, literally carried onto the floor against his will, sort of, was Bob Packwood, who they really should have just carried right off the floor and tossed him in a dumpster, honestly, but they didn't know yet exactly what a wacko he was. So they just considered him a regular senator. They carried him onto the floor. And that gets cited a lot. And it's true. There's no doubt about that. And it is an example of how you can deputize the Capitol Police to compel the attendance of absent senators. And he was hiding, sort of, in his office. I say sort of. It's all sort of, there's a footnote to all of it. There was some pageantry and prearrangement involved. He was trying to not go to the floor, but he wasn't hiding out, like in the sense that he, secreted himself out of the Capitol and actually tried to flee Washington and hide in the wilderness somewhere so he wouldn't be found. He was in his office. They knew he was in his office. He knew they were coming for him, and he made sort of a show of it and said, well, look, I don't want to be on the floor. I don't want to be there to have to take this vote. And I forget even what they were voting on, but it was something that he thought that, his constituents really didn't want him to be there to cast this vote on. So he essentially agreed to be taken to the floor against his will so that he could claim, well, I didn't, willingly go there and cast this vote. But what am I going to do? Hide, in the sewers or something like that? No, I'm going to let them come and take me, and I won't walk. I won't walk with their escort even. I'll make them carry me. I'm not going. I mean, if it was up to me, I wouldn't go. So that's the fight he put up. But, like I said, it was a little bit of a fake in that it was prearranged, and they knew he wasn't going to walk, and they knew that they were going to have to bring enough people to carry him, and so they made a great show of it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a real thing, and you really do run the risk of being arrested, at least, that's the term they use for it. And there's no booking or anything, but it's not a pleasant thing, and I don't know if everybody's going to want to go through with it. Matt Rigdon here also noting, I know people hate optics, but I'm sure some will argue that Dems should get handcuffed to make a point. Unfortunately, uninformed voters will just see Congress in handcuffs, and most people unfortunately figure if you're arrested, you must be guilty of something. And that's kind of true. And the spectacle, I don't know, probably doesn't play all that well, and I don't know if they're really going to cuff them necessarily. But I guess ultimately, senators aren't really going to be super willing, for the most part, to subject themselves to that kind of treatment or weird situations. It doesn't become them in most cases, and it doesn't lead to much either because they carry you on. Now, I mean, if you really had super insanity going on and chaos, and they were really forcing a vote on something that was just like, the dissolution of the United States or something like that. And if they didn't show, then the United States would continue because, they wouldn't have voted to dissolve the United States. Although at that point, you just, I guess at that point you're a dictator and you just dissolve the Congress, but whatever. I don't know. So whatever, imagine the most extreme thing you can think of that would drive Democrats to consider this as an option. I suppose it could be the case that they just don't have enough Capitol policemen to bring you onto the floor and keep you there. I mean, like all 49 of them rush one door and overwhelm the police force, and you assume that the cops at no point draw weapons because what are they going to do? Shoot senators? But maybe, who knows? At some point, it's like beyond guessing what's going to happen. I don't know. If we're at the point where they're going to shoot senators to prevent them from leaving, then I guess all bets are off. But that's the basics of it. I guess Julie's got the answer she needs at this point. Thanks for answering. Our call relays to Senator Schumer have been disappointing, and he hasn't articulated a clear strategy on how he's going to fight the nomination. Of course, the minority is horribly constrained, but obstruction helps, and that's something that you can do if you like. In terms of creating chaos and stretching out the votes. You can certainly call for quorum calls all the time and see if you can absent your senators and see what it's like when they pick you up and bring you to the floor. And honestly, you don't have to resist arrest. You can make them carry you, and then you'll show up, and then a quorum will be established and business will go on as usual. And so you won't have stopped the vote. But I mean, there's your optics question. What if it takes 2 hours, 3 hours to manage this and get another senator to the floor, and on C-SPAN you see them being carried in, and then they say, okay, a quorum having been established, we can now go forward with our work, at which point, I guess, debate begins, and the senator who got hauled in, I guess, is he free to leave at that point? Or maybe before he leaves, he says, I suggest the absence of a quorum. And then they'd start all over again. I don't know how long that one would last, and I don't know if they would. At that point, that contentious of a situation, the Senate president would probably not recognize the Democrat or anyone who was asking for a quorum call. Then you'd have another problem, though. I'm rising to my feet. I seek recognition. Well, I'm not recognizing you for that. Well, parliamentary inquiry, and you could fight. You could make a spectacle of it. So, anyway, let's see. We don't know why, there are various other tactics out there, but essentially, yes, if they want to keep their mind on the Kavanaugh business, there's very little that you can do to move the Republicans off of it. But there's trouble that can be made, but convincing repeat players in the daily drama like Schumer that it's worth doing is a tall order. I mean, there's very little of more import out there than the Kavanaugh nomination, but you could, for instance, I guess if you went the shut down the Senate completely route and tried absenting yourself from the floor, and the various problems with the strategy don't materialize, let's say, then you run into the political difficulty of the appropriations bills not being passed and government shutdown deadlines looming. And then it's a question of, can Republicans successfully portray a government shutdown as the fault of Democratic senators who aren't even showing up for work? And does that resonate? And do people know that it's about Kavanaugh? And Do people bring the whole history of the judicial wars to mind as they consider the merits of the Kavanaugh nomination? And the answer is typically no. And so and for the most part, you will find, I think, that senators say, yeah, I don't see any way to come out the winner in this. So they're unlikely to consider such a strategy, considering that it, one, doesn't ultimately necessarily stop the nomination, and two, doesn't look all that good along the way. On the other hand, if you want to just waste as much time as possible, drag the whole thing out for as long as possible, make the biggest spectacle possible, there certainly are things that can be done. But, job one would be convincing Chuck Schumer, for instance, that the spectacle is a net positive for everyone. It would be, I'm sure there's a large cross section of Democratic activists for whom the spectacle would be everything. But as we are frequently reminded, we're not everybody. So there is that. Okay, let's see. What other things do we want to pick up here along the way? Well, that looks interesting, but let's not make that one of them. I think that answers most of the questions. Arliss Bunny, by the way, did the producer's research on the side while we were working about it. The first name called in a roll call now would be Lamar Alexander. Mr. Alexander. And the 99th at this point, because John McCain died, is Todd Young, a Republican of Indiana, in case you forgot that he was in the Senate. Mr. Young. No answer, right? And then there'd be some mumbling, busy activity. The music would start playing. The classical music is playing. People would be whispering in one another's ears. They'd be saying, it's been like 14 years since we got to the end of a quorum call before that wasn't a live quorum. And I didn't mark anybody down because I thought somebody was going to suspend the quorum call at some point. So I don't really know whether we have a quorum at this point or not. We should just maybe do the regular quorum call again. Just do it faster. Yeah, okay, let's do that. All right, so Mr. Alexander. And then they would open up the microphones. And because now the hall of the Senate is full, now there's the mumbling is it's in the noise level. Not so much on the Senate side, but 100 people do make a certain amount of noise. On the House side, it's like a roar. It's unbelievable. You can hardly hear yourself if the floor is full and members are talking. And that's why occasionally, when you're listening on C-SPAN, it's not so bad because they're controlling it with microphones. And the microphones always pick up the feed when the speaker or the presiding officer or whoever's speaking from the floor is trying to be heard. We hear it above the din pretty clearly, but that's because of the microphones. But the sound system on the floor, by the way, the microphones or the amplifiers that play back the sound from the microphones on the floor actually cannot overcome the noise of a full floor with members talking. You cannot hear yourself. And so, sometimes if you watch anything like that on C-SPAN, you'll see, that whoever's in the chair will be banging the gavel and calling for order and saying members should take their conversations off the floor. And you're like, why? I can hear what the guy has to say. Nobody else on the floor can, though. The chair can't hear what's being said. The clerks can't hear what's being said. The people speaking can't hear themselves. So it's a little bit misleading. Anyway, I don't know why I felt the need to tell you that. But at any rate, the point is that I guess if they got to the end of the roll call, they would just do it again and they'd do it faster. And then this time they would write things down. So a roll call can take, half an hour or more to get people to the floor. And if they're not expecting something contentious, 45 minutes, an hour before they get around to the end of the thing. And then they realize, I didn't write anybody's name down, even when they did show up on the floor, because I thought somebody was going to suspend this thing for sure. You get the idea. So anyway, this stuff can go on for quite some time, and you can waste a lot of time. And do you want to ask Schumer to do that? You could ask. He'll be calculating 4, 5, 6 steps ahead and hearing from his caucus about yeah, I don't really think that, in West Virginia, it plays real great to see me arrested, or maybe it does, or, some people would love to see that, or I don't know, I'm going to be in trouble. So he's responding to his caucus. They're the ones that made him the leader, and they can undo that too if he doesn't appear sufficiently sympathetic to their concerns, even if they're scaredy cats. You got to take that into account with people. So, all right. I think that pretty much answers the question of the feasibility and the various problems with the thing. I don't know if anybody's going to want to deal with that in the future. Oh, you know what? It looks like we have talked straight into the break here. And so most of this won't have come out on the air. I will have trouble editing this later, but perhaps you podcast folks can hear all of this nonsense. And in the meantime, I'll start some music so that we have something available to play ourselves back in. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, we are back on the air at this point. Apologize for having let everything fall apart, technically speaking, on that one. And I think I talked all the way straight into the break. So live listeners, you missed nothing. I'll admit that to you. At this point, we're wrapped up. It's just a matter of whether or not the members of the Senate Democratic Caucus feel comfortable enough to go ahead with what is ultimately likely a futile gesture, but they might be willing to do something just to rally the troops. I started the music late, of course, because I talked all the way into the break, and you podcast listeners will enjoy my corrections when we get around to it. Live listeners will just hear a lot of extra music and wonder why I talked all the way into the break. Well, that's just one of those things that happens when you're on your own in the show. I think we're done. We've beat that topic to death, and the question now is what to cover next and where to go. I am going to leave, I think, though I have been asked to cover the topic for now, the question of what happened with the Democratic National Committee voting heading into the weekend and over. I guess they were done by the time the weekend rolled around. But it's a fairly big deal, though it's something that we have had explained here on the show ahead of time. But not everybody caught either that show or maybe all the details of things. But I'm going to leave it for another day so that we can have the opportunity to bring Armando in if he's going to be available this week. And we'll check on that because he followed that so closely and, can add a little bit to our commentary on it. Of course, it might also be well worth checking in with Chris Reeves to see whether he wants to comment on it because he was actually there and helped put together the proposal that they were actually voting on. Those of you who are old hands at the show and heard our previous discussions about it with respect to superdelegates know that I'm close to neutral on superdelegates. I actually kind of think it makes a certain amount of sense to have them, not so much because I definitely don't really want the nomination decided by them, but I'm unoffended by the notion of superdelegates simply because, I know who they are and I know why they're given their superdelegate status, and I know that the name is a stupid one and a misnomer, really, and makes it sound like they're more controlling of the party's direction at convention than they really are. But I also know that for whatever reason, people have gotten themselves whipped into a frenzy about superdelegates. And look, whatever it takes to make Democrats who are willing to participate in the party structure feel like they're being taken into account, fine, because superdelegates never really change the outcome of a convention anyway. So by that logic, if you offer up that logic by way of justifying their existence, you're also stuck with that logic arguing to eliminate them too, because why not? They've never made any difference, so why should you be concerned with their elimination? And okay, you have us there, so fine, eliminate them. The bigger point of contention that remained is about caucuses, and you've heard to no end about caucuses from Armando, and they're still not being eliminated, but at least there's some new rules about how they should be conducted and the extent to which states should have to try to comply with these rules. And I suppose there's probably some timelines for phasing things in. Things are better, but they're not perfect. But again, sometimes the situation is such that in a certain state, it's just not feasible to force a primary. Although I suppose if the rules required it, then the state Democratic Party would have to hop to and get it done and find a way to hold a primary. So whatever. They didn't really leverage that necessarily to the fullest on that question. But as far as superdelegates go, like I said, I'm unoffended by them. Superdelegates are, for the most part, there is one category of superdelegates I certainly don't love, and I don't offer much in the way of defense for. But the vast majority of the people we call superdelegates are Democratic members of Congress and members of the Democratic National Committee, people whose daily lives typically are wrapped up in the mechanics of democratic politics. And the idea that we should exclude them from voting at convention doesn't, to me, make a great deal of sense. Now, a lot of people who hate the establishment, whatever that means, and I mean whatever the establishment means and whatever the word hate means for these purposes, are unmoved by that because, well, they get to make all the day-to-day decisions and yada yada, and why not have elected delegates? And this is the time for grassroots members to have a say, and that is true. That is correct. And so it's a point. It's not a difficult one to argue with, and it's not a terribly persuasive one necessarily, because people who are elected as delegates still do have a voice, and they have the overwhelming voice. But okay, the arguments you've heard, with respect to superdelegates and their influence, and the fact that they can, because they know they're going to the convention, they can endorse early. And if you're counting votes, then people who are getting votes from superdelegates are seeing their vote totals inflated early, perhaps before any regular delegates have even been elected. And that vote total might, they say, influence the way people vote in even the early primary states, because they see so-and-so, and, in the case of the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton with this enormous lead among superdelegates, and so they say that must be the inevitable winner, and so I'll vote for the inevitable winner. And that's a pretty dim view to take of the Democratic voters in whom you supposedly trust so much that you want to have the entirety of the convention populated by the people they opt to send there. But I get the point. But again, to me, it makes a certain amount of sense to say, yes, when the question is who should the Democratic Party as an institution nominate as its contestant for the presidency, the idea of excluding from that decision all of the Democratic members of Congress with whom a presumptive Democratic winner of the presidency would have to work, and excluding all the members of the voting body of the Democratic National Committee with whom a successful Democratic presidential candidate would have to work seems like not necessarily that smart of a way of putting things together. Of course, in a certain sense, a successful Democratic president will have to work with the rank and file Democratic voters, yes, but not nearly as directly and not nearly as frequently and not on nearly as wide an array of subjects and at a not nearly the level of detail at which members of Congress and in some cases members of the DNC will be working with the president. And to me, it makes sense to say, I'd like to measure to some extent the voice of the people who are going to make the machinery, the gears of the party turn and the gears of the legislative branch turn. And they should have a little more of a say, in who are we going to at least nominate for the presidency. That doesn't disturb me, and some people it does disturb, and whatever. So to me, I say, okay, fine, no superdelegates. I didn't really need them. Where it becomes an issue, or will become an issue, and it'll be such a small bore and hidden and localized issue that we'll likely never really hear much about it. But it's unfortunate that one of the other arguments for superdelegate status is, for the most part, the people who serve in the DNC, the voting body, the members of the Democratic National Committee, and those who are superdelegates by virtue of being sitting Democratic office holders in the federal office holders. Those are going to be people who attend the conventions that bury themselves in the work of the Democratic Party nationally. And they also, of course, have risen to these positions by virtue of the fact that they have strong political organizations, some would even say machines, of their own. Members of Congress, of course, who have been elected, Democratic members of Congress, have that base of support back in their home district. They know how to, by definition, wage and win campaigns among their constituencies. Democratic National Committee members, same thing. I mean, that was one of the really kind of disturbing and misleading arguments that went on among some folks in the superdelegate debate over the past, it's not 2 years now, was they're unaccountable and they're unelected, and they're not. You're elected to the Democratic National Committee. You're just elected by the Democratic committee structure along the way. You stand for election to Democratic County Committee, wherever you live. And sometimes there's nobody against you, and sometimes they can hardly find people to fill it. So if you declare for it, you win. But in other places, it's contested. But if it's not contested, what's the problem? Who wanted to be there and didn't show up? Who is that person? I'd like to know. Too late. If you don't show up and ask to stand for election, I can't help you. But you get elected to the county committee. You get elected from there to the state committee. You get elected from there to the national committee. So you get the idea. You're elected along the way by other active Democrats from your area. And, so one, the idea that they're unelected is kind of not true. But also, the accountability is there too. I mean, those elections exist. You go to the state convention and vote on who's going to go to the Democratic National Committee. It's a straight up accountability moment. It's just, you've never been to one of those conventions? Well, whose fault is that? I guess, have you ever tried? I don't know. But anyway, the point is that you have to organize for those things. It's not necessarily like running for Congress, but you got to organize and ask people for their support and go around trying to collect votes and assure people that you're going to be up to the task. Depending on how seriously they take the task of voting on that issue, you got to do some convincing. So here's the thing. If you get there, it's because you're a muckety-muck of some kind, even if you're just a regular person. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a big donor. You're just the local dentist who treats everybody in town. And so when you show up at the local Democratic Party meeting, everybody says, hey, that's my dentist. I know that guy. He's a good guy. He wants to go on to the state Republican. Well, if he wants to go on to that, then good luck to him, and we don't have to vote on it. If he wants to go on to the state Democratic Convention as a delegate and be a member of the state Democratic Party, sure, why not? He goes and does it. Now, when he goes to the state convention and asks to go to the national convention, well, the rest of the country doesn't necessarily know, or the rest of the state doesn't necessarily know that he's such a great guy and a great dentist. You got to organize for things like that. And so you go around and say, well, my party chairman in the county is very well known around here. He's going to take me around and introduce me and tell people, hey, he's a good guy and a good dentist. We should send him there. If it works, you've successfully organized a campaign. Now you have what a critic would call a machine behind you, right? So the point of it is this. If you take those people who have those machines, by virtue of which they have risen to prominence and been elected to Congress or elected to the Democratic National Committee, and you just simply say, all right, we value your input. You're going to want to be at the National Convention. I recognize this. Here's what we're going to do. We'll just make it automatic so that you don't have to stand for election to the National Convention as a delegate. And what that does, it removes them from the candidate pool in which actual kind of regular people sometimes compete to run as a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. It draws a little bit of a wider pool. Now, those people tend to be people who have given themselves over to Democratic Party activity all along, because who else would stand for such an election, right? But this time around, we had Bernie Sanders people who have not necessarily been involved in Democratic Party activities all their lives, but say, I'd like to now. Okay, fine. Well, they are at a distinct disadvantage in the race for Democratic National Convention delegate with people who have been working the members who are there in that room to make that selection for years and are known to everybody. But hey, don't worry about it, because the state party chair and your local county party chair who made it all the way to the Democratic National Committee aren't in your contestant pool. You don't have to compete against people who are known statewide or known throughout the congressional district because they're the member of Congress. They're not in your way. It's you and other people who are at least recently politically active, if you haven't been active for years, and you get to make your pitch and stand for election among a pool of potential delegates who are as close to normal people as you're likely to find at a political convention. But tell all the people who are Democratic National Committee members and who are elected members of Congress, you can't go anymore on a guaranteed ticket. You don't have a guaranteed ticket to the convention, because that's not the way we do things. All delegates stand for election, but you're free to stand for election. They say, pain in the butt, but I know how to stand for election, and I know how to persuade Democratic voters. This is going to be a cakewalk, because it's going to be me versus the dentist, and I'm known statewide. I'm a member of Congress. Everybody loves and respects me. And those contests aren't going to be particularly competitive, and you're going to find that people who would otherwise have been able to finagle their way to the Democratic National Convention are now shut out by the stars of the Democratic Party. Or, I should say, they would be if the actual proposal was the complete elimination of superdelegates top to bottom and forcing party members who are members of Congress and members of the Democratic National Committee to stand for election to the conventions. So that's not what they did. And that's a good thing. And it's smart because it does eliminate that problem. But if you were for it, no, it has to be the complete elimination of superdelegates from top to bottom. And these establishment types who are trying to weasel their way back in. Now, just stop and listen to the compromise. Without my explaining it too in depth, this was the proposal that was made. Chris Reeves and Adam Bonin, both behind this version of the proposal, and Armando has explained it in the past, and it was a pretty simple compromise. You get to go. You don't have to stand for election and compete with grassroots activists to make it to the convention. You just don't cast a vote on the first ballot. You don't cast votes on the first nominating ballot. You leave it up to the people who have been elected to the convention for that purpose. And then if there's a deadlocked convention and that no one can get a majority, then fine. In the second or third, whatever, fourth, however many rounds of voting it takes to get somebody to a majority, then the people who are there by virtue of their service to the Democratic National Committee or in Congress or in other places can cast a vote. But first, they won't count, and it'll be up to regular people to do the nominating. It's going to come out the same way anyway, so cool. So that's the big compromise. I just wanted to offer one more defense of why do we have superdelegates in the first place? And the original thought was, well, who knows what the original thought was, but one of the founding thoughts of, and it wasn't the founders that did it. Superdelegates are only, 20, 30 years old. Not always had them. But the original idea was, let's get the muckety-mucks out of the way of the delegate pool races and let regular people stand for those elections. And that's a great compromise, in my view. And so this one's okay, too. So fine, they don't vote on the first ballot. It's kind of insulting, but they get to vote on a lot of things, including the platform. And plus, of course, some of them get to cast votes in Congress or on the Democratic National Committee, and that's a good thing. There is that one class of people that I don't love, but were originally a better idea, but got used in ways that are subject to a lot more criticism. There are special people who are selected, and the chair of the Democratic National Committee, I think, before any of the reforms were adopted, got to name, I think, like 75, and that's not a whole lot in the whole pool of delegates, but it's a pretty big number of people that you can send to the convention as a voting superdelegate by virtue of, well, pretty much anything you decide on, but hopefully the idea is extraordinary service or value to the Democratic Party, the United States in general, what have you. And so optimally, those selections are made to make sure that there are that there's broad representation along ideological lines, along ethnic lines, along other organizing lines like organized labor, or people who are have extraordinary insight and have been recognized nationally for some reason, good or bad, I guess. For being a prominent Democrat, thought leaders or prominent participants in the process. Now, what does that usually mean? These days, of course, a lot of that has devolved to prominent participant in the process. That's a big donor. And very often, yes, it is. But it's also the head of major national unions. And sometimes people look askance at that, but quite honestly, look, a lot of people work their way up that ladder over a long number of years. And it's not Jimmy Hoffa you're sending to the Democratic National Convention. It's a letter carrier or teacher who has been in the field and worked their way up the ranks and also happened to be prominent in the union and worked their way up that rank too. And were accountable the whole time via election. I didn't mean to spend any serious time on this. If you want a better insight into what actually happened, and we don't get Chris Reeves to come on the air, and I don't want to bother him, quite honestly, although I don't know whether he would find any particular thrill in doing this or not, but he's got a piece up from Saturday that explains it in his continuing Nuts and Bolts series. Nuts and Bolts inside the Democratic Party. The DNC passes major reforms. He'll tell you all about what it was like to be there and actually do it. Armando will have things to say, I am certain, and we can revisit the topic and discuss it again in the future. In the meantime, just to kind of close things out here, let's see, what other items might we want to make you aware of? Here's something interesting, although I wonder how long it would take to get through this one. Maybe we'll save that for another day, and I'm going to have to sort of go fishing here for something that is both interesting and relatively short, and I don't know whether we're going to make it on this one. Let's give this a try, though. This is a good think piece, but not that long. ProPublica, Jesse Eisinger had this one, and I thought this made for an interesting headline anyway, that he wrote heading into the weekend, why Manafort and Cohen thought they'd get away with it. We've been over that ground, but I thought his take might be interesting. It takes a special counsel to actually catch white-collar criminals. This is becoming a big issue. Lots of people talking about it. It should always have been a big issue, but just, wasn't. An article co-published with the New York Times, so you may have read it there. Oh, the audacity of dopes. Hardy har. The crimes of Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen are notable not just for how blatant they were, but also for their lack of sophistication. They really were stupid. The two men did little to hide their lying to banks and the Internal Revenue Service. One can almost sympathize with them. If it wasn't for their decision to attach themselves to the most unlikely president in modern history, there's every reason to think they might still be working their frauds today. And of course, that's the problem. But how anomalous are Messrs., you know how that goes, Manafort and Cohen? Are there legions of K Street big shots working for foreign despots and parking their riches in Cypriot bank accounts to avoid the IRS? Are many political campaigns walking felonies waiting to be exposed? Donald Trump says so, by the way. What about the world of luxury residential buildings in which Cohen plied his trade with the Trump organization? The answer is more disturbing than the questions. We don't know. We don't know because the cops aren't on the beat. Resources have been stripped from white-collar enforcement. The FBI shifted agents to work on international terror in the wake of 9/11. White-collar cases made up about 1/10 of the Justice Department's cases in recent years, compared with 1/5 in the early 1990s. The IRS's criminal enforcement capabilities have been decimated by years of budget cuts and attrition. The FEC is a toothless organization and is widely flouted. No wonder Cohen and Manafort were so brazen. They must have felt they had impunity. Now they only have immunity. Or at least that was originally somewhere probably in the offing, but no. Both of them have to bite the bullet. How could they not, though? Any person in any bar in America can tell you who was held accountable for the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, which peaked 10 years ago next month. No one. No top officer from any major bank went to prison, except in Iceland. But the problem goes beyond big banks. The Department of Justice, in both Democratic and Republican administrations, has lost the will and ability to prosecute top executives across corporate America at large industrial firms, tech giants, retailers, drug makers, and so on. Instead, the DOJ reaches settlements with corporations which pay in dollars instead of the liberty of their top officers and directors. Beginning with a charge to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 election, Robert Mueller has fallen upon a rash of other crimes. In doing so, he has exposed how widespread and serious our white-collar fraud problem really is, and how lax enforcement has been for years. At least, he is also showing a way out of the problem. He and his team are demonstrating that the proper attention, resources, technique, and experience can go a long way to rectify the white-collar prosecution crisis. What's Mueller's secret? For one thing, he has focus. He and his team have sufficient resources to go after a discrete set of investigations. In the early 2000s, the Justice Department had similar success setting up the Enron Task Force, a special SWAT team of government lawyers that prosecuted top executives of the failed Texas energy trader. That contrasts with the financial crisis when the Justice Department never created a similar task force. No single department official was responsible for the prosecution of bankers after the global meltdown. Not going to be able to make it all the way through the rest of the piece, but a great start to give you an idea of what's going on here, and a great place to start thinking about it and what ought to have been done, what we've lost in not doing it. But yes, it is absolutely the case that people like Donald Trump and Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen came to believe that they were simply never going to be prosecuted. It may also be, particularly in the case of Donald Trump, maybe Paul Manafort as well, that they came to believe that the reason they weren't being prosecuted is that the things that they were doing were not illegal. but maybe a little bit more likely even. And this actually gives Donald Trump a small amount of credit for understanding such things. It may have been that they simply believed that these crimes were so common and widespread that it was beyond the ability, either beyond the ability of the Department of Justice to prosecute them, or just simply not in their interest to prosecute them, both of which are, in some cases, actually true. They just thought, come on, everybody does it. And so therefore, either it must be okay, or at the very least, that when they do catch me, I'll say, come on, everybody does it. And that may or may not work. And you saw it happen already. Donald Trump basically said, yeah, the things that they're prosecuting Cohen for, the things that they're prosecuting Manafort for, these things are things that happen in every campaign everywhere all the time. Never mind that I said I was going to do things differently. Never mind that I said I alone can drain the swamp. Never mind that what I'm doing by excusing it by saying, yes, the swamp is full, is to say I intend to leave the swamp full. But there you have it. He just, he's a gimmitarian. Whatever benefits him that day, he's going to plead. So that's what he's pleading right now. We'll return to this topic and others
from Daily Kos Radio
during the rest of the week.
Radio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Plenty still to come, of course, on Justice Putnam's program, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. He's got the Kansas state government didn't tell Wichita area residents their water was contaminated by a highly toxic dry cleaning chemical for 6 years. Why would your government protect you? After all, you don't want to live in a nanny state, right? Well, it affects everyone. Next.